From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin with some images that the entire world is looking at. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is on the South Korean side of the border where he met the South Korean president, Moon Jae-In. Let's go with the pictures that we have. At the end of a historic day, both leaders have been attending a banquet along with their wives, Kim's sister, and the delegations from both sides. Earlier in the day, after the historic handshake, Kim and Moon signed a joint statement aimed at denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and bringing peace to their people. It is the first time any North Korean leader has crossed into the territory of the South. Both leaders have been very enthusiastic about their meeting, with Kim calling it a, quote, new era of peace, and Moon saying this summit will be a gift to the world.
North and South can freely come and go along the path that I traveled today, and if Panmunjom, the symbol of heart-wrenching division, where we are standing now, becomes a symbol of peace, the North and South that have one blood, one language, one history and one culture will return to becoming one, and people of all generations will enjoy prosperity.
This handshake took 10 years to happen. And when it did happen, the entire world was watching. It's a historic and highly symbolic gesture, to say the least. As soon as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un crossed into the south to meet President Moon Jae-in, every step brought the two nations closer. Kim came with a special message.
This is just the start and the tip of an iceberg, but I hope that our first meeting and what we discuss can satisfy the people who had such expectations of the summit.
This landmark meeting at the Peace House of the South Korean side of the border took months of preparations from both the countries. The climate that made the meeting possible began to develop when South Korea hosted the Winter Olympics in February and invited delegates from the north. The tension between the two neighbors started melting when Kim's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, went to attend the games. It was a public relations coup for the DPRK. After months of speculation and follow-up, finally these two leaders are moving towards better relations. By the end of their first day of meeting, both sides set their goal to denuclearize the Korean peninsula, formally end the Korean War, and help unite families divided between North and South.
I hope we will be able to talk frankly and come to an agreement to give a big present for the Koreans and the people around the world who wish for peace.
The next big thing the world is looking forward to is the expected meeting between the US President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. This unprecedented encounter would come just months after a vicious war of words, with Trump referring to Kim as Little Rocket Man, threatening North Korea with total destruction and tightening sanctions.
It means they get rid of their nukes. Very simple. They get rid of their nukes, and nobody else would say it. It'd be very easy for me to make a simple deal and claim victory. I don't want to do that. I want them to get rid of their nukes.
The meeting is expected in May or June. For now, people are happy to remember this big step when the leaders of the two Koreas met one-on-one, shook hands and hugged.
World leaders have welcomed this summit between North and South Korea. For example, US President Donald Trump said on Twitter, after a furious year of missile launches and nuclear testing, a historic meeting between North and South Korea is now taking place. Good things are happening, but only time will tell. University students have accepted the invitation of the Catholic Church of Nicaragua to participate in the peace dialogue called by the government of Daniel Ortega. The invitation comes after weeks of protests sparked by a reform of the social security system that has left at least 10 dead and hundreds injured. Students are demanding security for all and for the violence to stop. President Ortega invited the private sector to dialogue after backtracking the reform. The Episcopal Conference agreed to mediate the talks. Meanwhile, Nicaraguans held a vigil in the capital city of Managua in memory of those who have died during the protests. Students also joined the vigil to demand justice for those killed and for peace to return to the country. In Colombia, FARC party leader Jesus Santrich was taken to a hospital on Thursday night due to health complications. Santrich started a hunger strike 17 days ago to demand that the peace accords between the FARC and the government be respected. Santrich was arrested 2 weeks ago at the request of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, on alleged accounts of drug trafficking. The former guerrilla leader is also fighting an extradition order to the United States. Before being transferred to the hospital, he was detained for 2 weeks at La Picota prison in Bogotá. Still in Colombia, the Popular Liberation Army, the EPL, has announced they will continue an indefinite armed struggle in the region of Catatumbo. Meanwhile, teachers and students have announced they will not attend classes because they feel their safety cannot be guaranteed.
Residents of Catatumbo are living in fear. The Popular Liberation Army, also known as the EPL, is set to continue its indefinite armed struggle. International and national organizations have asked the Colombian government to take this into account as an emergency and to act, not only with public force, but with projects that help the development of the region. The teachers of this region said they will not go back to teaching since there are no guarantees for their safety, even more for students in the Catatumbo region. We are talking about more than 2,800 teachers in the region. This strike would affect more than 44,000 students.
That was José Manuel Jiménez from Bogotá. Now, human rights groups in Colombia are demanding protection for key witnesses in the cases against former high-level officials from the country's right wing, following a string of assassinations. Tatiana Portela has more from Bogotá.
Reactions continue over the assassination of Enrique Areza. He was a key witness in the case against former governor of Antioquia, Luis Alfredo Ramos, for his links to paramilitarism. Areza was assassinated on April 14th in the municipality of Bello, Antioquia. Because of this, human rights and social organizations have united to call upon international organizations to ask that the national government protect the lives of the witnesses, who are linked not only with the process having to do with the former governor of Antioquia, but also in the case against former Colombian President Álvaro Uribe and his brother Santiago. Organizations are soliciting help as 7 of the 12 witnesses were assassinated during early trial phases. They are demanding that the Attorney General of Colombia investigate to find out who ordered these assassinations.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has announced he's spoken to the President of Panama by phone and agreed to return their ambassadors, reactivate their flights, and install a high-level commission which will work on solving issues between the two countries. President Maduro was speaking at the opening of Expo Venezuela 2018. The 4-day event is intended to show off Venezuela's efforts to boost production and revive the economy. Maduro pointed to the success of pre-sales of the new cryptocurrency, the Petro, which he said had totaled $3.3 billion.
And we are still standing with our Bolivarian economic plan, with our priority sectors, and with the Petro, which has brought us excellent news, extraordinary news, I would say. So with all these initiatives, including the food supply mission and the Petro, we are building the strength we need so that after the elections on the 20th of May, we can have great economic revolution of growth, of productivity, and develop a healthy economy. Venezuela needs a healthy economy in trade, in finance, in the currency. We need to build the basis of a new economy.
And still in Venezuela, some of the presidential candidates have voiced complaints about what they say is a failure to comply with electoral guarantees which the government introduced for the current election campaign. They have called for a meeting with the Electoral Council to discuss it.
Independent candidate Luis Alejandro Ratti went to the CNE headquarters in Caracas to ask for a meeting between the presidential candidates and CNE officials. He wants to review some topics of the electoral guarantees agreement that he considers not to be totally fulfilled. For example, the preference that some media express for candidate Nicolás Maduro.
We've been reporting for a long time that there hasn't been transparency for the electoral guarantees, and they haven't been fulfilled. The agreements haven't been fulfilled. We are asking for an urgent meeting between the 5 candidates and CNE officials.
Apart from this, Ratti also stated that next May 16th, opposition candidates will announce if they will participate as a union or individually. Minutes later, Nicolás Maduro's chief of campaign, Jorge Rodríguez, arrived at the CNE to answer Ratti and Henry Falcón, who also denounced the same things as Ratti. Rodríguez affirmed that those accusations are fake and also asked for a meeting with public and private media.
I want to hear one manager, one president of any media company say if there has ever been any kind of phone call or any suggestion from the government about what they should or shouldn't broadcast. Just one. We completely respect freedom of speech, even when it is used to spread lies or to insult the revolutionary forces and our candidate.
Another candidate, evangelical Javier Bertucci, has been campaigning in the Vargas state. He has turned one act into his campaign's icon, giving soup. In his speech, he insisted in the need to increase local production and eliminate exchange control. He also recognized the work of the CNE.
To this day, guarantees have been fulfilled. The issues we had yesterday in Aragua and in the state of Miranda were resolved thanks to the CNE's intervention. They even started an investigation against the mayors in those cities. They are keeping their word about the guarantees.
During last Thursday, audits for electoral data finished, as well as the ones for software of the whole technological infrastructure. These are part of the 14 audits to be done before, during, and after the elections.
We'll take a short break now, but join us after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
We have suffered an imposed heritage of exclusion and frustration for generations. Our future is doubly bleak as we face the unabated racism and deepened deprivation reserved for Black Americans. Commonly depicted today as dangerous, carrying firebombs in their hands and hatred in their hearts. Who noticed before the fact that their hands were idle, their pockets empty, their hopes frustrated, and their hearts broken by indifference and contempt? Everyone is aware that a relatively few young Negroes have resorted to violence. But how many know that the unemployment rate for Negro youth in major urban centers has soared between 35% and 50%? They live in squalor in slums. They are cheated in education. They cannot hope for normal married lives. And they can expect more disease and earlier death than their white counterparts. To be a Negro in the United States is to be the victim of a system of deprival in a context of personal humiliation.
Welcome back. Indigenous people have marched to the National Congress in Brazil, calling the government of Michel Temer illegitimate and denouncing his bad record on indigenous rights. Mia Alberti reports from Brasilia.
Enough genocide reads the banner being taken to the National Congress in Brasilia. The indigenous people of the country accuse President Michel Temer of forgetting about their rights.
We are here to tell this illegitimate government enough of unfairness. We're here resisting to survive. And the red you see here? It's turned to blood with this Congress, with the killing of many indigenous leaders.
In fact, President Michel Temer has the worst record on indigenous land demarcation. His predecessors signed dozens of laws marking indigenous land. So far, Temer has signed 0. Former Attorney General Deborah Duprat says the problem is institutionalized racism.
They are victims of the judiciary and are not well informed. It takes a long time to recognize their rights and comes with obstacles, all under the argument of poverty, misery. All of that is racism.
This year's presidential elections have a new face, Sonia Guajajara, from the Guajajara people. She's the first indigenous person and woman to run for the vice presidency.
We're here to create a resistance to change this economic and political system that doesn't represent its people.
1 kilometer long of red ink, in this case representing blood, the blood of the hundreds of indigenous people who have died in Brazil in the last couple of years. This will be the reminders of this year's march towards the National Congress and this year's Free Land Camp. Mia Alberti in Brasilia.
And now let's go back to a new report from Mia Alberti in Brasilia with an important update on this story.
Today is a very important day for indigenous rights here in Brazil. President Michel Temer has signed the homologation of an indigenous land the size of 20,000 football fields for the Guató people in the state of Mato Grosso in west central Brazil. Now this is relevant especially for two reasons. Firstly, because it's the first homologation of an indigenous land by President Michel Temer, and secondly, because this was signed yesterday, the day that thousands of indigenous people were protesting here in Brasilia. And it's not very often that we see this type of action-reaction in politics. The president announced this on Twitter. He said that finally these indigenous people will have the rights to their permanent territory. And President Michel Temer remains one of the worst presidents in terms of indigenous rights so far. He only signed one homologation, whereas his predecessors signed dozens. But it's a small step, but it's a step nevertheless, and an important one.
That was Mia Alberti from Brazil. Now, Barbados Prime Minister Fruendel Stewart has announced an election date. It's May 24th. Stewart had until June 4th to call the election. Nomination day for candidates is set for Monday, May 7th. This brings an end to months of uncertainty in Barbados. Earlier this week, opposition leader Mia Mottley demanded that he call the elections, saying he was harming the country. And in her response to the election date, Mottley says she's happy the date has been announced, but she has concerns about the timing. She said election day clashes with exam time at schools.
There will, of course, be some anxiety on the part of parents and on the part of some of the children, and indeed some of the young people who are taking exams, as some of them are also first-time voters. They will have to navigate two serious decisions in short order. The Prime Minister and his government therefore need to explain to the country as soon as possible what arrangements will be put in place so as to minimize this anxiety. Anyone who has a child knows what I'm talking about. Those who claim that this is the result of some grand strategy really need to appreciate that this is nothing more than a royal fumble.
United Progressive Party leader Lynette Eastmond, who was a member of the BLP but has now formed her own party, said she's excited for this election.
contesting the election. We've started the process, we started our campaign, so we simply continue to roll out our campaign. We've been getting an excellent response, and we believe that we will do well when polling day comes.
While he does not yet have actual figures, Trinidad's Prime Minister says hundreds of English persons of Trinidadian origin were possibly affected by the Windrush scandal.
Now back in Trinidad, after attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London, Dr. Rowley told journalists that as the Windrush scandal unfolded, they discovered that Trinidadian nationals had been affected and even deported.
And this went under the radar until it came to the High Commission not too long ago. And the High Commission, I met one such person on Monday night who was quite grateful for the assistance that she had received from our mission in London when she faced that issue before it became an international embarrassment.
Prime Minister Rowley says the various Caribbean heads of Commonwealth were assured that the situation would be resolved, and that included the issue of compensation for those affected. In explaining why the issue was so important, he said that it was not just the persons whose right to remain in the UK that were being affected, but their families as well.
This thing worked its way all the way from welcome, come and help, to go home. And government policy changed along the way, and that is why political parties in Britain are now pointing fingers at each other. And interestingly enough, the chairman of this CHOGM happens to have been the Home Secretary, who had a serious role to play in what the outcome was. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had to be very diplomatic, but be very firm in treating with this matter.
Dr. Rowley says that this situation will take some time to be resolved, but it is one that the region will be monitoring.
We'll take one last short break, but we'll be back after this look at a report from our multimedia team.
You cannot have a drone without cobalt. You cannot have your planes without cobalt. If there is a shortage of cobalt, we can't wage a war. I have a very tiny country called Belgium, but I need a land that has so much resources. With that land, they were exporting rubber, they were exporting elephant tusks, specific ivory. We had about 10 million Congolese dying. It was modern-day slavery. Within a few weeks of him being in power, he was deposed. Within months, he was assassinated by the CIA on January 17th, 1961. He was a democratically elected leader of a country, assassinated simply because he wanted the resources of his country to benefit his people.
Welcome back. Thousands of people have been protesting across Spain after a court failed to convict 5 men on rape charges for an attack on a young woman during a bullfighting festival in 2016. Angry demonstrators packed central Madrid and other cities, shouting shame and no means no. The 5 men were jailed for 9 years for sexual assault, but many saw the sentence as too lenient. Under Spanish law, the charge of sexual abuse differs from rape in that it does not involve violence or intimidation. Now we take a look at more protests in Spain and other stories making headlines from around the world.
Barcelona on Tuesday to criticize the rising cost of education and demand the repeal of Article 155, which placed the region under direct rule from Madrid.
We believe that education has to be the pillar and the backbone that holds the Catalan Republic. We understand that we have to reverse those neoliberal and privatization policies that have been created over the past years.
Heavy rains over the last 24 hours has blocked roads and disrupted traffic in the city of Cape Town, South Africa. Authorities say that 578 structures and about 2,000 people have been affected by flooding. Now, South Africa has declared a national disaster over drought, affecting the southern and western regions, which had the driest years ever recorded in 2015 and 2016. U.S. comedian Bill Cosby has been found guilty of 3 counts of sexual assault, each of which carries a potential 10 years in prison. The actor has been on trial for drugging and assaulting ex-basketball player Andrea Costant in 2004. Around 60 women over 5 decades have publicly accused Cosby of being a sexual predator, but statute of limitation laws mean that only 1 charge has been brought to trial.
And now we've come to the end of this news brief. But this and other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.